Hello, viewers. Today we're going to be talking about disruptive impulse control and conduct disorders and multiple other disorders related within that nature. The DSM-5 has a relatively new category, and we can if this would be shortened, it's called the DCE, which was previously organized in different sections. The epidemiology is that this disorder is related with disruptive impulse control and conduct disorders are taken into account by issues with emotional and behavioral self-control exhibited in acts that usually violates others' rights. The common thread that kind of runs through all of these disorders is that they all involve impulsive behaviors. These orders usually tend to begin in childhood or adolescence and kind of persist into kind of adulthood. Some of the risk factors is that the 1-year prevalence rate of this disorder is at 2.7%. And the most typical age of occurrence is, like I said, late childhood, kind of leading on into adolescence and adulthood. Some other risk factors to consider would be kind of environmental, genetic, and how the child has grown up in the environment that they kind of grew up around. And or either even like being abused or neglected or having family issues that kind of build on of the occurrence and the disorder. So yeah.
Pyromania and kleptomania are perhaps the two most well-known impulse control disorders in the DSM-5. Despite this, both disorders are actually quite rare, and with pyromania having an incident rate of roughly 1% in children and kleptomania about 0.3 to 0.6 in the general population, these two disorders also have a higher chance of prolonging into adulthood, unlike the other disorders in this subset. This could be due to the fact that disorders cause significant distress for the sufferer, or who often feels guilty and does not want to carry out these actions. The only way to alleviate these emotions is with the high associated with carrying out the process of practices of these disorders, which becomes very addicting very quickly as they grow older. These actions may never truly disappear and could actually become more dangerous or severe as they become more knowledgeable with age. Risk factors for conduct disorders include harsh parenting style, exposure to physical or sexual abuse in childhood, as we talked about earlier, unstable upbringing, anything that would cause damage early on, whether it was through pregnancy as well. And then symptoms are listed here, and the child would usually show some of these as a way of letting them out if they were impacted growing up. So, and destructive of property and deceitfulness of or theft. Many of these things are very rule breaking and societal norms breaking as well. Oppositional defiant disorder risk factors: poor frustration tolerance, high levels of emotional reactivity, neglect during childhood, and inconsistent parenting. So a lot of these disorders have like similar risk factors and symptoms. Well, not similar symptoms, but mostly like similar enough that when you look at it, they are different fundamentally. Additional internet addictions or additional impulse control disorders such as internet addiction, sexual compulsion or compulsive shopping, and pathological gambling. All these could be very much linked together, especially with how technology is advancing pretty fast. And kids are having more access to technology. And because of that, they would end up exposed to gambling early on, or compulsive shopping, or just have an addiction way more early on.
Famous actor Charlie Sheen has been a controversial figure in popular culture for over a decade. However, much of what has caused his well-known outbursts and issues could possibly be contributed to his diagnosis of bipolar disorder. In October of 2010, while staying in a New York hotel, Sheen was reported as having engaged in disorderly conduct after experiencing an allergic reaction to a medication and voluntarily checked himself into a nearby hospital seeking psychiatric evaluation. Most likely, this misconduct was due to a lesser-known impulse control disorder in the DSM-5, intermittent explosive disorder, or IED, which is characterized by several instances of failing to control angry outbursts and aggressive impulses. The outbursts must also be unproportional responses to the psychosocial stressors and cannot be attributed to another disorder, such as antisocial personality or borderline personality disorders, among others. IED is perhaps the root of several outbursts that have been attributed to Sheen during his highs or periods of mania. Sheen has been observed as having uncontrolled gambling and sex addictions, as well as these intermittent explosive outbursts, which are all hallmark subtypes of impulse control disorders. So, our first study was a study of conduct disorder in Italian students. The purpose was to study the associations between the proposed specifiers conduct disorder scale, or PSCD, and the Strength and Difficulties Questionnaire, SDQ, and validate the use and effectiveness of the PSCD scale. It's considered an easy-to-use tool for testing symptoms and psychopathic traits in children and adolescents. The four components of psychopathy include interpersonal or manipulative, affective, which includes lack of guilt and remorse, antisocial, and lifestyle and behavior. Recently, callous unemotional traits in children have been the focus for researchers as they're heavy indicators of aggressive and dangerous behavior later in life. The study included a sample size of 492 Italian students aged between 11 and 14 years old, as well as 34 language teachers and caregivers who were mostly mothers. The students were tasked with taking the PSCD, consisting of 24 questions pertaining to 4 domains: grandiose manipulative, callous unemotional or disregard for others, daring impulsive such as recklessness, and conduct disorder or antisocial component that includes aggression to people and animals, destructive of property, theft, and violation of rules. Teachers and caregivers were given the SDQ, which includes conduct problems like bullying, hyperactivity, emotional problems like worrying, peer problems such as being disliked by other children, and pro-social or helpful behaviors. And the results from this study concluded that the PSCD questionnaire supported a bi-factor model, which means that the specific 4 domains and the general factor work together. This type of model is advantageous as it directly separates the unique contributions of both factors. Also, it found that roughly 7.6% of the students exhibited psychopathic traits, and the incidence of narcissism, impulsivity, and CU traits were higher in boys than in girls. Our second study was on the impacts of socialization on personality and impulse control. And it was meant to study the dynamic interplay of impulse control and perceptions of school-related experiences. Because children and adolescents spend a majority of their lives in school, the school-related experiences and socialization are major contributing factors in personality. Because of this, impulse control is one of the main focuses of teachers and parents, as they want children to feel comfortable in school and achieve academic success. It is feasible to consider conscientiousness a crucial factor in whether or not a child, whether with or without impulse control issues, will achieve success in school. And this is exactly what researchers of the study set out to prove. They hypothesized that conscientious children are much more likely to create long-term goals and follow through with them and will receive more support from teachers and parents. Therefore, it is increasingly important to guide children towards building their conscientiousness and aid in impulse control as they get older. Sample sizes for this study ranged from 8,204 to 8,421, and 50% of those were male. And they included students aged 10 through 21 across 6 ways of assessment in order to analyze the links between impulse control and school-related experiences. By using the random intercept cross-legged panel model, these links were investigated through controlling for the stability of IC and SREs over time to model autoregressive effects, and for the stability due to trait effects estimating a random intercept factor. The cross effects of this model were able to show within person effects versus between person effects, making it easier to estimate the deviances between trait-like behavior and SREs, both of which are assumed to be important for personality change. Overall, the research in this study discovered that students who experienced the high levels of impulse control were able to find an increase in satisfaction in school, and it led to a positive trend in their goal setting, motivation, and overall conscientiousness. In addition, they also were testing for parents rewarding students for their good behavior and conscientiousness. And they noticed and found out that if there was more impulse control and the parents were rewarded, it would lead to more of that conscientiousness rather than students who were not rewarded. So for the treatments, because of the issues that arise from the behavior and impulses of those affected by disruptive, impulse control, and conduct disorders, around half of ODD and a third of CD sufferers receive treatment. Most of the disorders use psychotherapy as an effective treatment plan, or more specifically, many treatment plans include the use of family therapy in order to mitigate the socio-environmental effects on the child or teen. Since the disorders are likely to begin in childhood or adolescence, antipsychotic medications are usually not the first choice for treating, since their effects have not been thoroughly studied on children and teens. So we have our key takeaways here. So for me, the subtypes of the set of disorders and how they relate to each other while also having unique features is something I learned. I also learned that the qualities that have to do with the psychopathic and 4 domains of conduct disorders kind of go hand in hand with each other. I was able to connect that mental disorders are always heavily affected not only by genetic factors, but also environmental factors. And we could see that with family and socialization, and then the external reactions to those behavior sets. And then finally, something that surprised me was how pyromania and kleptomania are actually not that common as I would have expected. And they also start a lot earlier in childhood than what I originally thought.
For me, I said for something that I've learned, I said these are all like a collection of disorders kind of marked by a variety of like levels of difficulty, controlling like aggressive actions, self-control, and emotions. And from what I've connected from something that we've learned during the semester so far are patterns of behavioral and psychological symptoms, which kind of affect numerous aspects of life or even referred to as psychological illnesses, because as we could like relate to like different disorders, how they all have like age rates and how most of them are they kind of lead on from when they were younger, persisting into like adulthood and stuff like that. And what really surprised me was the fact that kleptomania can cause serious emotional, familial, career, and legal, and even financial difficulties if it is not treated.
For me, I never realized that internet addiction is considered an ICD, and something I connected along with the semester-long themes was that each of these disorders meet at least 2 or 3 of the criteria for abnormal. What was defined as abnormal? Like not every single disorder fits every category. Just maybe one two or three at least. And then I learned what surprised me was that there are many different types of ICDs, and some of these are like a bit obscure and not well known. So, yeah.
And then overall, we realized that disruptive impulse control and conduct disorders are much more than a child simply acting out, but are instead affected by their environments in school and at home, and psychopathy has a close link to the behaviors associated with these disorders. And then here are citations. Thank you for viewing our presentation today.